Hi there, everybody. Welcome to Star Trek Lost Stars. My name's Tony Morrow, and as always, we're probably experiencing a little technical difficulty. If you're catching us live, you may be experiencing that right now. I can see that we are now live. Okay, great. That's fantastic. If you're catching us on the replay, thank you so much for catching us on the replay. Sorry for that little stutter of a start, but here we are. If you are joining us for the very first time and you're probably wondering, Tony, what is this Star Trek Lost Stars things that you're talking about? This is a 4X turn-based strategy game that we play in the Starfleet universe using the Federation and Empire rule set as set out by the Amarillo Design Bureau. And we play this online using a platform called Vassal and live stream it here to you for our collective entertainment. Have you participate in the sort of the story, the narrative, the excitement of what goes on, and of course just to be able to share and build a community of players who enjoy this game, enjoy the story that goes along with it, and just really have fun. So, excuse me, as I am having a wonderful start to this day. It's a very exciting series of events, and but let's talk about what we are going to be discussing in today's wonderful episode. So we are going to be talking about a role-playing story about mind-altering parasites and a alien autopsy that reveals some surprising results. As well, I'm going to do a quick turn 104 and 105 reveal and more space Vikings. Yep, that's right. The Juggernauts are back, and they're visiting us again. Of course, why wouldn't they? Exciting stuff. So let me first get to the wonderful story of the alien parasites. So let me preface this by saying that so when we play this game, obviously it is a turn-based strategy game. It's a war game. And we include some role-playing elements to sort of like have fun, add color, and make it more entertaining for everyone involved. In that context, we'll tell stories about like sort of the drama, the days of our lives, the soap opera that is everyone's little corner of the galaxy. So I play the Klingons. There's another group that plays the Federation, the Peruvians, which are like basically feathered Gorn, the Kzinti, and so on. And so we tell these various stories in sort of role-playing emails, and it's really just designed to be able to add color. Now, on the aspect of like the actual gameplay, depending on the interactions between the players and how they role-play those interactions, i.e. a character, a diplomat, a leader, a captain of a ship, interacts with another species, another captain of a ship, a diplomat, or a leader of their government, or whatever it may be, and they have an interaction, and they're playing a character. And they might have that interaction and it goes well or it goes bad, and that will influence events. Will they go to war? Will they have peace? Will they be allies? Will they, keep their distance from each other? Whatever the case may be, that role-playing element sort of shapes a lot of how we play the game. So, in this context, there has been a lot of this going on so far in the game, and there has been one particular sort of development with regards to the Peruvian Horde. Now, we've talked about the Peruvian Horde on this live stream before, and we've talked about the sort of the dynamic that goes on there. Now, they're modeling themselves as far as a role-playing character after the Mongol, like Genghis Khan and the Khan Mongols of the steppes, and they have this sort of collection of a centralized government, but instead of conquering, as for example, the Romans did, and subjugating peoples under their collective rule, the Khan was very much sort of like the Persians, I think. They would conquer a civilization, but they would allow them to keep their religion, their culture, and various other things. So how has that played out here? In this context, in this game, that we have basically a player who has these sort of vassals or non-player character components or like elements in the game that contribute to him from an economic standpoint, because we have resources in this game that earn you money, that allows you to buy stuff. So there's some kind of economic relationship there. And they're able to maintain sort of a national military that allows them to be able to defend themselves. And in the event of a war or conflict or something, those ships then fight sort of on the side of the Peruvian Horde. And this has been a very advantageous arrangement for the Peruvian Horde. They have basically nestled themselves into a niche in the game where through role-playing, they've been able to essentially dominate all non-player character interactions. They rule the roost when it comes to that stuff, and that's fantastic. Um, in that context, other players in the game have found it frustrating to try and sort of break in. And understandably, it's, if you have a neighbor that's in your territory or like near you and you want to try and sort of bring them on side, there's three ways to do that. The first way is to send a fleet, bomb them to smithereens, and take them over. That's the Klingon way. The second way is to send diplomats and through a series of mechanics that we have in the game, allow them to sort of choose to join your faction, in which case they join you. There's no economic or military sort of infrastructure damage that occurs in the war or the brute force method. And so they integrate seamlessly into your economic structure. The only thing is you lose that sort of national military infrastructure. So any ships or bases or any of the stuff that they had when you first discovered them, it disappears off the map. But you get that planet without any sort of penalties or issues or anything like that. Now, the third way, is the way that's sort of showed up in the game thus far with regards to the Peruvian Horde and the Vassals, which is this unique arrangement the player has with the game master and the NPCs, whereby there's some kind of economic arrangement there. They basically pay him a certain percentage of their income over whatever length of time. And those national armies or those military forces that were there when they were discovered remain in place, and they can be sort of called upon in the event of a conflict. So those are the three different ways that currently exist in this game. As I mentioned, the Peruvians, based on their role-playing, have really sort of narrowed this niche, and no one else is really able to get in there. The only exception is maybe Big Red. Big Red being the Thulians. I've mentioned this before, and we'll go over it when I do the map reveal. Has also sort of played into this. So both those two players and their factions are sort of doing well when it comes to the various NPC minor factions that they encounter. Okay, so how can we disrupt that? How can we create a scenario whereby we can tell a story that can validate or liberate the things that we want to do, the decisions that we want to make as players in the game? I mean, certainly it's a game, and you can just make a decision at any point in time and just go to war, because after all, it's a war game. But it's more fun and more exciting when there's a story behind it, right? Like there's a raison d'etre to go to war or do this or whatever it is. And so in that context, we're creating this story. Now, an added benefit is the idea is that there are mechanics in the game that allow you to sort of weave a fanciful tale that can have real impacts in the game. And I'll give you an example. So as I've mentioned, this is not the first time we've played this game. However, it is the first time we've live streamed this game. And in previous iterations, there have been interactions with, for example, Orion Pirates. They are another NPC faction that we can interact with. And in the past, I, as another faction, I was playing the Romulans at the time, paid money to have the Orions and their ships fight on my side and sort of do damage to the other player. Ironically, it was the player who's playing Big Red right now, and that was incredibly frustrating for him at that time because he had no idea where this was coming from. Now, in the storyline, he sort of did this James Bond-esque mission to be able to find out who was hiring these pirates to attack him, and he found out it was me, and that led to a war, and, well, that was exciting. Another one was a sort of a very complicated story whereby the Federation at the time, who was played by the current Peruvians actually, set up a very long tail story and spent money to develop this story, whereby he planted evidence in two different player empires to indicate that one player was preparing to attack or do something horrible to another player. And so basically what he ended up doing, he did this three-way deception. He created an expectation or this story around a Romulan player attacking the Kzinti. And then he planted evidence that it was the Remans. So the Reman faction, I was the Romulan faction, and there was the Kzinti faction. So these three factions at play. The initial or the first layer of this onion was that the Remans had reason to attack the Kzinti, so they did that. Then, as another layer to the onion, the Romulans, which was my faction, had planted that evidence with the Remans to make them go to war with the Kzinti. And it made sense at the time as far as why that would occur. As a result of that, both of those two attacked me, which was frustrating at the time, but fun overall. And then the last layer of the onion was when I spent money, effort, and tried to figure out where this bad story was coming from because I knew I didn't do it. And then we found out it was the Federation. So there was this long, weavy story that was mapped out that sort of motivated player character actions in the game and resulted in sort of real world warfare, so to speak, like a warfare within the game that had real consequence. So in the context of this game and here and now, we're weaving this story to be able to do two things, at least two things. Who knows what else will happen? The first is to be able to create a motivation, a raison d'etre, to go to war or to raise a conflict with another faction. Now, there's a couple of different layers that go to this as far as there are a number of different motivations. But if we can create a universal reason for other players to align against this one player, then we're sort of stirring the pot and creating conflict without necessarily having to fight the war ourselves, if that's the intent. Now, that's not a very Klingon way to do things. I mean, you want to get in there and get dirty. But nonetheless, you want, if you're going to fight a battle, make sure you can win it, and so get as many people on site as you can. The second, because of the unique, and this is unique in this game, the unique relationship of the vassal system as it is, it's dependent on the relationship between the player and the NPCs. So it's unclear whether this would have any game impact or not, but if there's sort of money and missions that are put behind, James Bond missions, that are put behind making this story true in the minds of the NPC player characters or the NPC factions, then it's possible that it could sow some discontent. And maybe with some other activity going on in the game, who knows what's going to happen, that could mean that, oh my goodness, one of the vassals leaves the Peruvian Horde. Who knows if that could happen, but if it did, wouldn't that be exciting? That would totally change up the dynamic of that whole vassal system and how things are working. So there's that. And then, of course, lastly, it's just fun to tell a story and see what happens. Now, I've been talking a lot about this story. Why don't I just get to the story? Okay, let me read you the little Alien Autopsy story that I have written. It's not exactly Stephen King or something like that, but it's a little something that will sort of tell you what this is all about. And then at the end of the little story, I'll give you some context for the inspiration and sort of where my motivation for this particular storyline came from. I think as I read it, you'll get it if you're a Star Trek fan, but we'll see. So here we go. Medical Research Facility, planet Neo-Shekis. Shekis Province, Klingon Empire, date unknown. Subject, elderly Gorn male. Cause of death, natural causes. Autopsy, performed at request of family. Background, subject was previously a member of the ruling council of Neo-Shekis. Family reported substantive change in behavior approximately 10 to 12 years ago. Subject alienated himself from family and engaged in unusual behavior, including change of diet, isolation from regular social activities, extreme political views, and sudden changes in temperament. Reports of similar changes of behavior have been reported around the time of first contact with the Peruvians and Klingon species. The shock of first contact had been deemed the cause of these initial reports. However, behavioral and societal changes have persisted up to the current day. Now, let me just take a step back from the story here and give you context. Approximately 10 to 12 years ago, or about 25 turns in-game, the Peruvians moved into the Hex where this planet was located. It was a Gorn planet or a Gorn minor faction. I was right next to that Hex at that time, so the Peruvians moved in, made first contact with this NPC Gorn faction, and then I was right next door. We had engaged in a diplomatic exchange back and forth, both him with them and me with them. And they ended up deciding, as was the case, to go with the Peruvians, become a vassal. And then shortly thereafter, we started a war, or rather, they started a war with us. Potato, potato. And the war started, and they became a valid military target, and the Federation stomped them, and I followed up, and I ended up taking the planet. So that's the context for the first contact piece. The Peruvians had made first contact about 12 years ago in game, and so and the interaction with them had been initially friendly and then turned sour or unfriendly relatively quickly. So back to the story. Initial reporting. Standard scans and visual inspection of the subject revealed an unknown mass near the base of the skull and rear of the neck. A small protrusion was identified, origin unknown. Autopsy will proceed with a surgical assessment of the mass. Are we recording? Yes? Okay. This is Dr. Garag Tal, senior surgeon with the Czechis Medical Society. I'm assisted today by Dr. Harun, a fellow and representative of the Klingon Medical Society. And lastly, we have medical administrators from the Tri-Skelling Medical League, representing all partner species. Today we will be conducting a surgical assessment of an unknown mass in the vicinity of the base of the skull on the deceased Gorn male, aged 250 years. It should be noted for our guest, this is a young age to die of natural causes for a Gorn male. I shall proceed with an incision laterally along the base of the skull and vertically from the crown to the lateral incision. With the vertical incision complete, Dr. Tal begins to pull back the tough epidermis of the patient, revealing the base of the skull and something else. We have removed the epidermis and surrounding tissue to reveal the spinal cord and base of the skull. The unknown growth can be seen as a medium-sized mass with a hard exterior or exoskeleton. There are what look like legs extending from the center mass and connecting with the spinal cord of the subject. There also seems to be a spike-like protrusion penetrating the skull, seemingly connecting with the subject's brain. On a visual inspection, I would describe the growth as a form of parasite that seems to have infested the subject's brain and spinal cord. I have taken samples for testing and DNA deconstruction. However, I've never seen anything like this before. The sample and patient will be moved to a secure isolation lab for further assessment. Pause recording. Moments later, the administrators, Dr. Tal and Hurun, gathered in the conference room. While I'm not sure what to make of this, it is reasonable to deduce that the subject was infected with the parasite around the time of first contact. The eyes of those in the room turned to the Klingon. This finding is consistent and supported by anecdotal evidence from other satrapy species, the Klingon reported coldly. It is not a coincidence that these societal and behavioral changes occurred once contact was made with the avians. Changes in behavior have been reported on all planets which have been in contact with the avian horde. Based on recent experiments, it is not a coincidence. Based on recent experiments, in the Empire, we believe the Klingon physiology to be toxic to the parasites. Hopefully, Dr. Tal's work will provide more insight on this point. Our working theory is that this is why those who are infected seem so aggressive and hostile to Klingons. Turning to his colleagues, Dr. Tal spoke in a hushed tone. We should keep this information confidential until I can prove these findings. However, I recommend conveying this preliminary data to medical agencies across the Tri-Skelling and even the Federation. Better to be cautious. The administrators nodded in agreement, and after thanking the doctors, proceeded quickly out of the room to alert their superiors. After the door closed, the Klingon poured the contents of a small flask into 2 glasses sitting on the side table and offered his colleague a drink. Now, we wait. The two nodded and took a sip. To be continued. All right. So, what's that all about? Well, couple things. One, if you are a Star Trek fan, then you probably know where I'm going with this. If you go back to season 1 of TNG, there was an episode near the end of the first season called Conspiracy. Just had to remember it there. Conspiracy was basically the second part to a 2-part episode. There had been an episode earlier in the season where an admiral had visited the ship. He made some kind of like vague statement to Captain Picard about some unknown threat, and they make reference to it in that episode. So when they show up, basically the thing is there's this. I'm not sure how to describe it. It looks sort of like a primordial sea creature. It's like got these pincers, this sort of like tail thing, and like I think it's got 6 legs. But anyways, it's this parasite kind of creature, and in the episode they show like a diagram of it clamped onto a spinal cord of the individual with these like pincer things into the brain. It has this tail which protrudes at the back of the neck, and there's this little sort of tail or antenna that sticks out, and that's how you know. And at the very end of the episode, they go into this room and they find the sort of the executive assistant to the admiral. He's sitting in this weird chair. The parasite thing goes into his mouth, and long story short, they find out that he's sort of like the mother, the queen of whatever the species is. It lives inside him, and they kill it. And it was supposed to be, as I understand it, the beginnings of a storyline that was going to be very akin to the Borg, but audiences didn't really respond well to the bug story, and so they kind of killed that in the crib, so to speak, and then moved on with other storylines. That's the only time you ever really heard of it. As far as parasites or other kind of like little creatures like that in Star Trek, somebody on Facebook actually tagged me on a Halloween episode in the 2nd season of the original series called Cat's Paw. And I don't know if you guys remember, but there's this episode where they show up to this weird planet. There's like a castle or something. And there's these 2 wizards on this planet. One is a bald guy with like a fanciful, very over-the-top kind of wizard outfit. And the other one's this black cat that turns into this woman who is the other part of this dynamic duo. And they're both powerful, wizardy type people. And their powers are just based on some kind of technology that's in their castle / ship or whatever it is. It's a sort of an illusion generating machine or whatever it is. And at the very end of the episode, they discover the true sort of appearance of these life forms, and they look sort of like what I described. They're like tiny, but there's no mention of them being parasites. They're just they look really weird, and I'm sure it was just like the special effects crew on TOS did their best to put something together that was truly alien. It was really weird. And then lastly, you guys might remember, it's not called this, but I think of it in my mind as the Jellyfish episode with the original series. They go down to this planet, and there's all these sort of jellyfish-like creatures that are hiding in the shade. They go into this building, and it falls on Spock and like infects him or whatever, and he's fighting it the whole time. And then they have to irradiate him with like high power solar radiation or something, and that kills the parasite. But the idea is that the parasite, this jellyfish thing, once it infects the host, it sort of controls their behavior. They get overly violent and aggressive. So why do I share those stories? One, to establish that there's a very clear line of thought around parasites and their behavioral adjusting component quality in the context of Star Trek. Like, it exists, it's out there, and you can find it. So there's multiple examples of this kind of stuff going on, and that's kind of like my motivation for this storyline. Now, the idea here is that basically, as is pretty obvious with kind of where I'm going, there's 2 routes that this can take. One, that this is real and that these aliens do actually exist, and it's really messing up with the sort of the actual relations, like whether the Peruvians are unknowingly infected, whether they are knowingly infected, whether they are knowingly infecting other subject species. If that's a real thing that can be somehow justified in game, then great. That could be like, that could have real life sort of mechanical outcomes with regards to the dynamic and the relationship between the different factions, NPC factions in the game. But truly, the original intent of this is as the title of this video is, which is Alien Autopsy. And if you guys are of a vintage where you might have watched the original X-Files back in the 90s, you will remember that there was this conspiracy theory floating around about an alien autopsy. There was that Alien Autopsy video. It was grainy and poor quality, and the question was it real? Because there was like this whole thing in the 90s about aliens and UFOs and gray men and abductions and all sorts of stuff. And there were, there was a lot of like movies, videos, even the X-Files was based on that whole premise, the I Believe poster in Fox Mulder's office. So this whole idea, or this particular storyline about the alien autopsy was it real? And for a long time, there were a lot of people that believed it was real, even though, to my knowledge, it was proven to be fake. And so, the fact that this alien autopsy was real, what does that mean? Is the government hiding the fact that we've encountered aliens? Are there aliens among us? Are we all getting abducted and probed in very violating ways? There were a number of like movies and things that came out around that time that talked about that. So that's what this is. This is, for all intents and purposes, the combination of a conspiracy theory pushed by a government making it a propaganda message. Drop just enough crumbs to make it believable. Drop insufficient information to disprove it, but allow people's imagination to really get going. And in a world of like social media, high bandwidth communication and various other things, like sort of we live today, disinformation can have a real life of its own, as we are all experiencing in the world today. So that's the idea here. I'm planting a seed, watering it, and see what happens. If it grows and sort of like sprouts and spreads, then great, because there would be sort of like in-game mechanics that would help validate that. As far as the nuts and bolts of the game, we run what I call James Bond missions or Prime Team missions, where we plant information, spread disinformation, do stuff like that. It's an intelligence operation designed to be able to propagate misinformation and change the narrative. That's effectively what this is doing. But from just a fun point, it's like poking, prodding, stirring the pot, having fun in the sense of this creative story about an alien autopsy. I mean, who doesn't like a good alien autopsy? Well, it's better than, doing the frog in science class, assuming you guys ever did that. However, that's where I'm coming from with that whole thing. And that's what's going on there. So let me take a pause, go down to the comments, and see what people are saying about the Alien Autopsy. All right. So we're starting up. Just to remind everybody, if you've joined us or you followed us this far so far in the broadcast, thank you so much. We are, 30 minutes in already. So thank you so much for keeping with us. If you like this, please give us a thumbs up. Consider subscribing to the channel. The whole purpose of this channel is to be able to grow a community of players that like to have fun playing this kind of game. And as you've seen in previous streams, if you've joined us, we have a game that we're getting ready for, a new campaign, and we have sort of a near full roster of players. But if you're interested in potentially joining that campaign, or you have any interest of joining future campaigns and playing this game with us, then please, the link to our Facebook page is currently near the top of the chat. So feel free to go in there, click that link, take you to the Lost Stars Facebook page, and there you can follow the page, message me directly on Facebook Messenger, and we can see about what room there might be in the next campaign. So if you like that, then please check that out. All right, so here we go. Warming up the fusion beams from Jim. Hi, Jim. How you doing? Charles Pop saying, hey, Tony. Paul Williams is saying hello. And Bill Smith, hey, ho. Gordon's here with Space Dragon Service Animal. Excuse me. All right. So there was a little bit of a challenge getting started because of the just a setting that I forgot to click on my end. So the start to this video didn't have the normal 5-minute intro that normally exists. It was more like 30 seconds. You let me know if you like the longer intro or the shorter intro. Put it in the comments below, and then I can make that change going forward. So Jim says, started. Bill says, nope, you are live. So the Gorn Space Dragon animal. So says the Gorn Space Dragon service animal. Chuck saying, I know where the mass thing is from. My tinfoil helmet self. The entire thing reminds me of the JFK autopsy. That's another good example. The JFK, like the whole, I mean, again, it depends on your vintage, but JFK the movie with Kevin Costner was a movie that, and a popular, very popular movie, successful movie, that was sort of inspired by the conspiracy theory around the JFK assassination and the magic bullet and, you know, the lone gunman and the grassy knoll and all the sort of like things that happened around that. So a real event that occurred, obviously, but the surrounding conspiracy about myths and disinformation about what actually happened. Obviously, I mean, who knows what the real story is at this point? I don't know. I'm not a JFK aficionado, so I don't know what the real deal is, but obviously there's a lot of, misinformation out there about the JFK assassination. But it's a good example, like spread, whether it was intentional or not, spreading disinformation can muddy the message or muddy the understanding of the event. Here we go, Bill. So now you know why everything seems to taste like chicken. Paul saying, great stuff, like it. Chuck says, a false flag operation like January 6th. Ooh, let's avoid the political discussion, but whatever. Or man who never was. Living proof, join and play. There we go. So again, this, and just to sort of touch on that and how things can get in the comments of any YouTube channel, live stream or otherwise, this is all about, this stream is all about this game, the fictional world that exists in this game, the fun that we have playing in that fictional world. If I ever make reference to real life comparisons, it's merely to illustrate points or something that's going on in the game. We are not here to be able to sort of dive into current events in a way that would sort of stir the pot and cause issues. So let's just avoid that completely. This is all about just having fun, playing Star Trek games, strategy games, and beating up on people in a virtual space. So let's stay there. All right. Let's totally change the perspective. Let me actually take 1 second. I'd like to introduce you to somebody. Tori, my amazing daughter, is with me sort of in studio today. Look at the camera over there. Woo! There we go. So my amazing daughter is here playing in the background. If you do hear a little bit of cute little voices or various other things, that's what's going on. She's inspecting my Halloween costume as we speak. So with that slight distraction, let's head into turn. Once, there we go. All right, let's hit a turn 104. So this is turn 104, and let's just talk about a quick round of the table to see what's going on here. So we'll do the bases, starting with EP and fleet cap and various things, and then we'll go from there. So let's start with EP. We can see that, don't put that too far away, Tony. The Borak are sitting at 72 EP. The Carnavan are 14. The Federation is at 69.5. The Hydran is at 21. The ISC, 17. Now, I think that number, I think that number's correct. One of the things that's challenging about this game is it doesn't discern between non-player characters and player characters, but we don't put the planets under the NPCs. They're sort of neutral, or they're displayed as neutral. So the EP calculation will be correct, and the fleet cap, which we'll see next, unfortunately, because there's no way to sort of separate those, might include some of those other player information. So here we go. ISC 17, the Klingon at a cool 70. The Kzinti at 24. The Lyrans at 13. The Peruvians at 58.5. Romulans at 24.5. And the Tholians at 71.5. So as you can see, there's sort of like a bunch floating around the 70 mark, 72, 71.5, 70, 69.5. And then the Peruvians at 58.5. And then sort of the rest of the new players that are floating between 14 and 24. So let's go to fleet cap and see how big everybody's fleet is. All right. So we can see that the Borak have 124 ships. They are getting big with 299 attack and 574 defense. Fleet cap 567. Carnavan have 15 ships with 4785. The Federation at 167, still maintaining that lead, but not growing by too much, at 569 to 759 respectively. Fleet cap 774. The Gorn at 18 with a 45-75 split. The Hydrons at 20. ISC having 33 ships, but that is colored by or like influenced by non-player factions. So I think the actual number, we'd have to dig into it, but I think the actual number is more like around 20. Klingons have 97 ships with a 341 to 370 split. Kzinti have 80. No, that can't be right. 80 ships? Oh, okay. So the reason why the Kzinti are displayed as 80 ships is because there are two non-player character factions that have relatively large fleets. That's contributing to that fleet number. So the Kzinti number is a little sort of off relative to what the player actually has. The Lyrans have 26. The Peruvians have 94 ships with a 376, 452 split. The Romulans 27 ships with 88, 138 respectively. And the Tholians lastly at 123 with a 266 to 516 split. Yeah. So that's going to be interesting. At the end of the day, really, I mean, we're looking at a bunch of folks who are floating. There's a cadre of folks at the 120 plus, the 167, of course, which is the Federation. They're in their own stratosphere. A bunch of folks that are floating around 100 and going from there. All right, so let's get into sort of the around the clock, and then we'll do a tactical assessment. Whoops. And we'll do that right now. All right. So we are back, and let's look at the situation. You can see here big red in the top left. They've subjugated all those minor factions, and they have this one planet that is still up in the running. It's a Borak faction, so that's contributing to the overall fleet numbers for the Borak. So their numbers are a little off. Maybe 120 plus ships isn't quite accurate for the player count. But you can see that they've got their planet here, and the Peruvians seem to be moving stuff in that direction to be able to deal with it. A couple things to note here. You'll notice that First Fleet has shown up. They are moving in this direction, and there's a number of ships on the border here at this minor or developing world on the border with the Hydrons. We'll see how that develops in turn 105, but as you will see, it's an evolving story. As we go over here in turn, this is 104. We can see that the Klingon faction is pretty much status quo. We're still recovering from the combination of what I'll call sea monsters and space monsters and space Vikings. Whether they're other factions that are coming in and pillaging our territory, or whether it's random krakens space krakens that come in and just rip, tear, and destroy. It's almost worse than the probing done by our Alien Autopsy friends. It's pretty rough. This whole area in the top corner here has been just viciously torn apart, and it is tough. It is tough to deal with that. Let me switch my head so we can look at the Kzinti. You can see the Kzinti here and the ISC. These are the two-player factions, and the the thing that came out of turn 104 going into 105 is the formation of what's called the Tri-Skelling Alliance. I don't know, I can't remember if we talked about it in the last stream, but long story short, the Kzinti, the ISC, and the Klingons are getting together to form a faction, an ally faction within the game. Under the terms of what are allies in the game, that means that we have a shared supply network, and we have shared initiatives. So we combine our total economies for the calculation of our initiative, and that's the order in which we go. So even though the Kzinti and the ISC might have economies that are smaller, that would make them or allow them to go first before the Peruvians or any of the big factions, Feds, the Peruvians, the Tholians, the Borak, because we're a part of an alliance, we combine our economies in that sense to make that calculation. So we all go at the same time. As we move down, we can see that the Feds, of course, they stomped their space monster in X-Ray 32 around there. Move ships to be able to repair them at X31. These ships are still sort of in repair mode from the experience, the traumatic experience with the Juggernaut faction. And of course, the Peruvians have their own little space monster over here. Just above my head, right there. Their own little space monster to be able to deal with. Now, here's the fun part. Both these factions, the Federation and the Borak, have encountered warp-stabilized sensors, or warp-stabilized structures. In this game, when you detect warp-stabilized signatures, that's a base, usually associated with a player character. In this case, based on everything else that's going on, this is most likely the location of the Juggernaut faction. And as the bane of my existence, I am motivated, inspired, a cheerleader for either one of these guys, Feds or Borak, to go in there, stir the pot, cause destruction, beat the snot out of the Juggernaut factions, because, as you will see in 105, these space Vikings continue to harass and make things difficult for me. Good times. One other thing here, you can see that there's Space Amoeba. Anyways, the space monster over here continues to exist in Federation space. We'll see if and how they deal with it in the turns to come. Let me switch my head around. We can see here on the Borak side, not much really to change. They've got the warp stabilized encounter there, and we'll talk about that momentarily, as well as, well, here's the exciting stuff. The Western approaches. So we've got the Carnavan, who have encountered a number of warp-stabilized and slow-moving somethings over here. This, we will see, is another player faction in the next turn. We have the Romulan faction dealing with some repairs from their previous conflict with both the Lyrans and the Hydrons. We have the Hydrons here having all sorts of fun with the combination of the Peruvians and these two factions that have shown up, which are Federation minor factions. So I'm not sure the exact details of this. It'll be fun to get the details from the Game Master. But we have a Federation here. Let me remove the ships and bases so we can see them. We have a Terran Federation planet here. And then we have a Lyran planet here. So the question is, what happened? Was it the two planets were discovered and then the Feds just attacked the Lyrans and took them? Possibly. Or was this sort of like a little thing that happened in the turn that they were discovered? Who knows? Either way, at this point, they're both Terran. One was originally Lyran. And yeah, they're an interesting faction to play, without a doubt. One of the things that's important to note on this particular turn 104, is the location of this particular ship, Papa 26. It is a Peruvian ship, and you will notice, as I remove all the stuff, this little hex is on the wrong side of this little yellow line. These yellow lines, as you've probably already picked up, are neutral zones, or the borders between our different factions. And in our game, one of the ways that you... one of the sort of criteria, if you cross a neutral zone into another territory, you must assume war status. Why is that important? War status incurs war turns, which get you toward exhaustion, economic exhaustion. And of course, when you go to war status, you have your full economy at your disposal. This was encountered by the Klingons when we went into Peruvian space to attack the Juggernauts. And we had to assume war status when doing that, even though we weren't attacking the Peruvians. And so the same thing is true here. So we've done that walk around. Let's quickly go to turn 105. So a couple things that are interesting here. One, what is this? This is a Carnavan Wormhole. So let's just go real quick down here. You will see that there is a wormhole right here that the Carnavan has gone through, and it shows up here. Also interesting to note, there's a neutral zone that's appeared here, which means that somebody's been talking to somebody and has established a neutral zone, probably indicating there's somebody here, and there may be someone in the chat who may be in that neighborhood. As you can see, let's talk about Big Red real quick. Big Red has First Fleet now on the border with the Hydrants. Interesting. Let's take a quick look at First Fleet. First Fleet isn't the most massive thing in the world, but it is 2 cruisers, 6-7s, and a bunch of these patrol craft, a couple of DDs, and a scout. Not nothing, certainly something, and interesting that it's gathering on the border with the Hydrants. We can also see that just as a sort of thing to point out, we can see that the Tholians have, where is it? I know you're here somewhere. I saw you before. I'm looking for, there it is, bats. So one of the things oh, of course, my head's in the way. Let me move my head. On the border here with the Klingons, you will see that they have a Bats M. The evolution of the base stations in technology goes YBS. So it's a Y-era base station, then a base station middle era, BSM, which you will see just up here. Then a BATS M, or battle, I think it's battle station M. And so you'll see that it's instead of a 10-9 for BSM, it becomes a 12 straight. And then the next step from there is a star base, or an SBM, middle era star base. On the Y era, like you've seen before, we go YBS, and then you can upgrade it to a YDK or a Y era space dock. It's kind of like a Y era star base, but that's what that looks like. So you can see that the Peruvians, or rather the Tholians, are wheeling and dealing in some way. And oh, what's this? They got their diplomat over on that Borak minor faction. Will be interesting to see how that plays out in the coming turns. We can see here, and this is the big thing. Hello, my space Vikings. Yes, that's right. I missed it at the first pass of this map, but it was pointed out to me, hey, Raider 1 is a Juggernaut fleet that just happened to pop up once again in Federation space. That makes it about 10 turns straight now that we've had alternating Juggernaut and monsters coming in and visiting our space, which, as you've seen, between the Swarm, the Orb, the Artifact, the 3 now different Juggernaut factions that have visited us, that's 6 turns, and they've been sort of spread out over 1 or 2 turns each. So over the past 10 turns, or 5 years, we've had, my goodness, six different encounters, I think it is. 6 different encounters with all these factions. The most traumatic was the Artifact, which, while it only destroyed 1 base, took out a very large portion of our fleet, destroying at least 1 dreadnought and almost 10 frigates. And then the Juggernaut faction that we ended up tackling with, which ended up destroying 2, not 1, but 2 Juggernauts, or sorry, 2 dreadnoughts, and a host of frigates. I believe the final count was 15 frigates that it destroyed. Unbelievable, like the impact of those 2 alone. Not to mention, of course, the Swarm and the Orb have also destroyed their fair share of bases, and took a fair deal of energy and effort to eliminate, without perhaps as much of an ROI on the tech benefit from taking them out. Unbelievable. So that's the scenario. We have a space Vikings up in the north, and they are continuing to attack us. Now, One of the things about this map, this initial map does not show what is in this fleet. However, I've got a supplementary email from the game master that tells me it's a cruiser, a light cruiser, destroyer, and 3 frigates, which is sort of the standard task group configuration for them, not the DN version that came in the last iteration. So it's a little bit easier to deal with, but still nonetheless a pain in the posterior, and we'll probably pop one of these bases between 105 and 106. As we go down here, we can see that, well, things along the border look exciting. Let me pull back the ships just to show you what's happening here. You will notice that there is a starbase that will be completed, a starbase that has just started, and yeah, so we are building some starbases along this border. Very exciting. Really, I mean, considering the Peruvians are buffing up their base infrastructure along the border, it's kind of par for the course in order to be able to make sure that they don't rush us a la Maginot Line in the German and French in World War II. Arguably, though, I'm building the Maginot Line and I don't have the depth, whereas the Peruvians do have a little bit more depth. So I don't know. I think maybe I'm on the wrong end of that stick. We'll see. We'll see how that goes. As you can see, the Kzinti are doing their thing in their space, building out bases and infrastructure to be able to grow their economy. The ISC doing the same. Whoa, what's this exciting thing over in the corner? We have a Hydron Vol and a 2-way wormhole that has popped up on the very edge of the map. Where's that coming from? Let's go back. You can see that there is a wormhole here in Lima 21, essentially right next to the Hydron homeworld. And bada bing, bada boom, like on the opposite side of the map, we have this wormhole. So very interesting to see. It'll be interesting if we can get some supply over there and maybe send ships over to the Hydrons. Should we conquer the Hydrons? Maybe. Should we help the Hydrons? Maybe. Should we use them as a way to be able to stir the pot with some of the other factions? Possibly. Who knows? It's all fun. So let's just see how much fun we can have. The Federation continues to have good, exciting times. You can see the Space Amoeba still doing its thing. The Feds have backed off the encountering the Juggernaut, what is very obviously the Juggernaut faction. Whereas the Borak seem to have engaged this. I saw an email, although I don't know the results of the battle, but it would seem as though that the Borak have engaged the enemy, so to speak, and the pot is being stirred in that respect. Let me swap my head around so we can see this side of the map, and boom, shakalaka, here are the Remans. As a reminder, the Remans are essentially the Romulans, but with the KR ships, meaning the Klingon ships that they traded for in the Starfleet universe. That is a in-universe thing that occurred narratively. And so the KR, Klingon-based Romulan ships, are the template for the Remans, and you can see them there. And that's our walk around the park. Let's do we didn't do a quick check on EP. Quick check on EP. Borak remains steady at 72. Carnavan 15. Federation still steady at 69.5. Hydrons 21. ISC 17. Klingons 70.5. So we are 0.5 ahead of the last turn. The Kzinti are at 24. The Lyrans 14. The Peruvians 58.5. Holding steady. Remans at 14. The Romulans 23.5. I feel like that dropped by a point or half a point. Were they not at 24 before? And the Tholians, again, consistent at 71.5. Doing a quick roll of the fleet cap. Excuse me. We can see the Borak growing their fleet to 131. They have broken the 130 mark. Now, again, that minor faction in the corner of Tholian space is tweaking that number, but nonetheless, their fleet is growing. The Carnavans are at 16. The Federation 167. That is the same as last turn, so their fleet is not growing. The Hydrons, the Gorn at 18. The Gorn at 18. That's interesting. So the Gorn are a minor faction. We don't have the Gorn visible on the map here anywhere. So that's just a minor faction at play. One sec. All right. Excuse me, I'm choking here. All right, so the ISC are at 33. Klingons 97, Kzinti 81 as far as number of ships. The Lyrans 22, Peruvians 101, so they are building their fleet. They have cracked the 100 mark, which is important. They have 4 more ships than we do. Interesting to note, the Klingon attack factors, 375 to 389. The Peruvians now exceed us by a significant amount, both in attack factors and defense factors. Interesting. So if you add that with their satrapies, that is a point of concern, one might say. The Remans, and of course, the reason why that is, like, it's very clear. They're in a war economy, so they've got their full economic force building ships and stuff like that. So that's no surprise. The Remans are at 15. They're new on the board at a 58 attack, 77 defense with a 77 fleet cap. The Romulans at 27 ships, so they're building ships. And the Tholians at 124, holding steady. So long story short, what we can see is that there are some factions building fleets, i.e. the Peruvians, and the other sort of Western approaches, as I call them, the Hydrons, the Romulans, Lyrans, Carnavan, and so on. They are building fleets and making stuff happen. All right, so let's take a quick moment and sort of recap where we're at. So we've talked about the Alien Autopsy story, the role playing that goes along with that, and that trend that is going. We've done the quick walkthrough of turn 104 and 105, expecting 106 relatively shortly. And of course, we've talked about Space Vikings, the incessant, persistent, and ever interesting stream of consciousness that is radio silence from the Juggernaut faction as they walk into Klingon space and destroy everything in sight. It's challenging. Let's do a quick recap. We're going through the comments here. Let's see. Boom, 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 boom. I'm just trying to make real life connections, says Chuck. All good, all good. Bill says the same. Chuck says, I'm trying to stay away from the World War II Nazi ones. They had a lot of them. It's so true. Jim, get the makeup ready, Tony. Get the makeup ready, Tony. What does that mean, get the makeup ready? Are we doing drag queen stuff? What's going on here? I'm not... I have no idea what that means. Get the makeup ready. 3 Kzinti miners. 3 Kzinti miners. Yeah. Which are in play. Plus the player. Bill Smith says, what? What did them filthy Terrans do to the Lyrans? Seriously. Like, what did they do? They stomped him is what they did. Chuck says, Tony, I don't want to hear you complain about it. 20 turns I have been playing, and I've had 6 monsters, Orions, and Raiders. Well, I don't include Raiders and Pirates because that's just like, that's small potatoes. I don't share with you that. It kills the odd ship, but certainly doesn't take out a base. But man, them Juggernauts and monsters do. I kid. Bill says, Starbases, woot woot. So says the Gorns, seeing Planet Killer. And Jim Howard says, Halloween costume time with your daughter. Oh, right. So let me just quickly share with you the theme for my Halloween. I am the wolf from Red Riding Hood with the, as you see the granny cap. My daughter, the one you saw moments ago, will be dressed up as Little Red Riding Hood. And so we'll be walking around the neighborhood collecting candy, hopefully, as that dynamic duo. My wife was going to be the huntsman, but she's now sort of a witch, which is with our other daughter, who is a sort of an elf princess, a dark elf princess with her bow and arrow. So it's a sort of an exciting dichotomy of classic fairy tales and new fantasy as we go out and pillage our neighborhood for all their sweets. We'll see how that goes. Anywho, that's we are now just over an hour. So quick recap here. Thank you so much for joining us here on the live stream. Again, if you're catching us on the replay and you've lasted this long, an hour into the broadcast, thank you so much. Please give us a thumbs up to help with the YouTube algorithm, attract more attention to this channel, just to be able to build our player base, create more community, and allow more people to have fun playing this game, maybe if you enjoy listening to the story. And of course, please, consider subscribing if you would be so kind. Again, helping us just get to the goal of 100. Our goal is 100 subscribers by Christmas. If we can get to that by the end of the year, that would be fantastic. Again, all in the effort to be able to grow a community of players who play this game, the Federation Empire game as published by the Amarillo Design Bureau, having fun, enjoying our Star Trek geekdom, and just having a good time overall. So if that's up your alley, then please consider subscribing. Hit that like button to help us along in the YouTube algorithm. And other than that, thank you so much for joining us today. I will see you in the next episode. And one last wave from my in-studio audience. Wave to the camera.
And also, Vivi, Mama's being a dragon and Vivi's being an elf warrior.
Oh, dragon, my mistake. So dragon and elf warrior, that's what we're doing. All right, happy Halloween, everybody. Have a wonderful time. Stay safe, get candy. Make sure you keep yourselves well taken care of, and I will see you next week. Thank you so much, guys. Ciao for now.